Hey guys, I'm Dave Trull and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today, we're updating our router table. If you've been following along with my videos, you'll know that I'm in the process of updating my shop, including the shop itself. And while some of the projects I do are temporary, I still want them to be as safe and stable as possible. Updating my router table is one of those projects. The process I use to update this table can be used whether you're building a table from scratch, updating an existing table, or just want to make a table that's temporary but still stable and safe. When I first built this temporary table, I set it up to be used with my two small routers. I have a single speed Porta cable and a variable speed Makita. They're both about the same size, 1 3/4 horse and 2 1/4 horse. But sadly, the Makita speed control is shot, so I needed to upgrade. The Porta cable is a great router, but because it's single speed, I'm limited to the router bits I can use. So when I bought my new Triton router, which is a 3 1/4 horse variable speed router, the insert that I had originally created was too small and probably too flimsy. So I ordered a new router table insert. This one is made of aluminum as opposed to the old plastic one. And it is, of course, a little bit larger in size than the first plate I had. So let's take a look at how I took the existing table, made some changes, so it'll upgrade to my new plate and my new router.
The first step was to remove my old router plate. This was made from 1/4-inch acrylic and I kept it small to prevent sagging. It was held in place with 4 5/16 machine screws. With the plate out, I moved to the underside of the table and removed the 4 T-nuts that held the plate in place. The new aluminum Pro router plate I purchased from Rockler is 1/4 of an inch of aluminum and is larger than my old plate. The aluminum will be able to handle the weight and vibration of the new router with no problem. I decided to keep the front edge of my router plate in the same location. Using blue tape and a pen for better visibility, I extended the line for the front edge. I wanted to keep the plate centered on my T-tracks, so I measured over on one side the correct amount and drew a line square to the front. Next, I dropped my new plate in place on the 2 lines and drew the other 2 sides. While I'm sure Rockler has a jig to inlay a router plate, it's easy enough to build one. I ripped some 3/4-inch plywood down to 3 inches wide. 2 were the same length as the plate, and the other 2 were longer than the plate, plus 6 inches. With my vintage Craig K2000 jig, I put 2 pocket holes on each end of the inner pieces. I used the plate to keep my jig parts square, clamped them down, screwed them together with 2 1 1/4 course pocket hole screws. I flipped everything around and held the next piece tight to the plate and clamped and screwed that in place. The last side was fastened in the same way. I didn't bother with glue for this because, well, I'm only going to use it once and, well, okay, maybe twice. I picked up a new white side pattern bit and chucked it up in my Porta cable router. Now we could set the jig for cutting the plate recess in position, lining it up with the lines I'd drawn earlier. I clamped the front and made sure that the router base would clear the clamps when I started my cut. Since I had no way to clamp the back of the jig, I held it in place with a few 1 3/16 23 gauge pin nails. To set the depth of the router bit, I set the router plate on the jig, placed the router on the plate, and lowered the bit until it just touched the table. I could then make my first pass around the jig to create the lip for the router plate to sit on. This bit has a 1/2 inch diameter, so I made a few extra passes so that the lip was at least 1 inch wide. Next, after laying out a 1 inch lip, I cut the extra material from the table with my jigsaw. Sometimes I get ahead of myself, and this is one of those times. This plate can be fastened in place with 2 corner screws, but I didn't realize their location. I cut just a bit too close, causing a little extra work once I saw what I had done. Oh well, fixing mistakes is part of being a woodworker. Now it's time to see how well the plate fits in the recess. Side to side and front to back were nice and snug, but the recess was just a bit too shallow. I grabbed my calipers and saw that I needed to go 0.4 of an inch deeper. Minor adjustments like this can be tricky on most routers, so I came up with a plan. I placed my 6-inch rule on the router base and measured the distance from the tip of the bit to the rule. In this case, it was 0.89 inches. I added the 0.04 inches to that and lowered my bit until the distance between the bit and the rule was 0.93 inches. I carefully lined up my jig, clamped and pinned it down like before. Remove the extra stock in the recess. After a little sanding and removing of all the dust, the router plate sat pretty flush with the tabletop. After removing the base plate from the router and screwing the router table plate insert to it, I could check to see if it fit the opening. I really didn't think it would, at least not on the first try. The router sat high near the center point of the recess, both front and back. I marked the center of the recess and used the base plate that I had taken off the router to mark the area where the router got hung up. Again, using my jigsaw, I removed the areas that I had just marked out, staying outside the lines to give me a little extra clearance. A little more sanding and the router drops right in. Now I could mark the 2 holes to fasten the plate in place. Yep, this is where I realized the mistake I'd made earlier. I should have left those corners wider, but I have a plan. I had already planned to stiffen up the table under the router plate with some maple. So I cut 2 pieces at 18 inches by 2 inches by 3/4, centered them on the opening side to side, but I brought them in far enough where they could be used to capture the mounting holes. The pieces were epoxied and screwed in place, and then I cut the curve so that the router would fit into the table. With the router plate back in place, I used a 5/16 inch drill bit to drill the 2 holes. I used the plate as a guide, drilling through the MDF tabletop and into the maple braces. My table happens to fold up, and this made inserting the 2 1/4-inch T-nuts easier. I set them in place and drove them home with a hammer. Just in case my recess was a bit too low, I decided to add some adjustment screws to the table. I started by drilling two 5/16" holes on each side of the recess. I used a backing board to try to prevent blowout, but that didn't go as planned. Next, I lifted my table and tapped in 4 1/4" T-nuts. I went back later and added 2 small screws to help hold them in place. After lowering the table, I threaded in 4 1/4" set screws into the T-nuts. With the set screws in place, I could check the height of the plate and raise or lower the screws until the plate sat level with the table. I realized that it would be easier to adjust the screws from the bottom, so I did go back later and turn them around so the adjustments could be made with the router plate in place. Once I was happy with the height, I was able to fasten the 2 corner screws to hold the plate in place. It was finally time to make that first test cut. I chucked up a chamfer bit and ran my first piece. One last step was to make a blank plate to sit in the table when the router wasn't in use. I used a 1/4" thick piece of Lexan cut to the same size as my router plate. I also used the router plate to drill the same holes for the mounting locations, so that when the router was not in use, I could put in this Lexan and have a flat tabletop to work with.
You don't need a router table to do woodworking, although it does come in handy for some applications. I have a raised panel door build coming up, and this new setup will make that a breeze. And if truth be told, I do the vast majority of my router work at the router table. So this new router and a stable table will make my workflow so much smoother. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this build. Is there something I could have done different, smoother, easier, smarter? Leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you haven't already, maybe think about subscribing so you don't miss out on any of the new videos that are coming up. If you enjoyed this video, share with your friends and give it a thumbs up. For now, have a great day, stay safe, and take care. We'll see you soon.